The fingers barely moved. Just two, index and middle, pressed flat against the blanket fold for less than a second. That was all. 47 seconds later, the 7th floor of Harlow Valley Medical Center turned into a war zone. Glass exploded inward from 4 windows simultaneously. Black-clad figures dropped on ropes from the roof, while boots hit linoleum and flashlight beams cut through the smoke. Screaming erupted from every direction as nurses dove behind their stations, and patients fell out of bed scrambling away from the noise. Armed men in stolen security uniforms spun toward the doors, reaching for weapons they were never supposed to have inside a hospital. And standing in the middle of it all, completely still while the world shattered around her, was a nurse named Audrey Voss, 41 years old, 12 years on the floor at this hospital, and someone that every single person on that ward had spent the last 3 hours treating like she was invisible. They were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. So, if you're new here, stay with me until the very end, because this story is going to take you somewhere you don't expect. If this reaches you, like this video, subscribe and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. It started the way most disasters do, quietly and with paperwork. Audrey Voss had been on shift since 6 in the morning. 12 hours in, her feet hurt in the way that stopped being a sensation and became a background fact, like bad lighting or the smell of antiseptic that clung to your clothes for hours after you left. She had changed 2 central line dressings, de-escalated a family argument in room 706 that had been threatening to go sideways since noon, and caught a medication error in a chart that would have sent an elderly man into arrhythmia before anyone noticed something was wrong. Nobody thanked her for any of it. That was also a background fact. Harlow Valley Medical Center sat in the middle of Carver's Reach, a mid-sized city in the eastern stretch of Montana, where winters came in like a punishment, and the hospital was the 3rd largest employer in the county. It was not a glamorous facility. The floors in the East Wing still had the original tile from a 1987 renovation, and the elevator in Building C had been making a grinding noise for 11 months that facilities kept logging and never fixing. But it had a decent trauma unit, a cardiac surgery program that punched above its weight, and a nursing staff that mostly knew what they were doing. Audrey was one of the ones who actually knew. She had transferred to Harlow Valley 4 years ago from a position at a hospital in Bozeman, and before that there was a gap in her resume that her file listed simply as federal contractor, civilian advisory role. Nobody had ever asked her about it in any detail. People rarely asked nurses much of anything beyond whether they'd done what they were told. She was 30 feet from the room when the shift supervisor cut her off. Voss. Margaret Solis was 48, had been a charge nurse for 16 years, and operated with the efficiency of someone who had long ago traded warmth for competence. She wasn't cruel exactly. She was just the kind of person who dealt in transactions. "You're not assigned to 714. Audrey stopped. "I know. I was going to check on the patient in 712. Mrs. Okafor's drainage bag needs. Dr. Fenwick's team is handling the entire wing." Solis said it without looking up from the tablet in her hand. "Administration's orders. You're on 700 through 710. "Since when?" "Since about an hour ago." Solis glanced up then, briefly. "Don't make it a thing, Audrey." Audrey looked down the corridor. The hallway outside 714 had 2 security guards positioned at the door, which was unusual. Hospital security usually covered entrances, stairwells, and the ER waiting area. Stationary posts outside individual patient rooms happened occasionally for high-risk psychiatric cases or police custody patients, but the man in 714 was listed on the board as a trauma admission. GSW to the left shoulder, stable, recovering. She had walked past his room twice during her shift. Both times she'd noticed things she wasn't supposed to notice. The guards weren't hospital security. The uniforms were right. The badge placement was right. But the way they stood was wrong. Weight distributed differently, attention tracking movement rather than resting at neutral the way security personnel did after 6 hours on a stationary post. These were people trained to observe threats, not people trained to look authoritative near a door, and the patient himself. She'd caught a glimpse through the small wire glass window in the door during her second pass. Mid-40s, lean, the kind of muscle that came from function rather than aesthetics. His left arm was immobilized and his color was still off from blood loss, but his eyes had been tracking the room with a steadiness that didn't belong to a man in recovery. He was watching for something. She had filed all of this in the back of her mind the way she filed most things, not dismissed, not acted on yet, just held. "I'm not making it a thing," she told Solis, and went back to her section. The man who made everything worse arrived at 5:47 p.m. Harlow Valley's chief administrator was named Douglas Pratt, and he was the kind of man who had learned early in life that authority was a performance and had been performing it ever since. He was 53, silver-haired in the specific way that read as distinguished rather than old, and he wore his suits inside the hospital because he believed, and had once said aloud in a department meeting, that presentation shaped perception. He came onto the 7th floor with 2 people behind him. A woman Audrey didn't recognize carrying a portfolio, and a man in a jacket that fit wrong across the shoulders. Not medical staff, not administrative. The jacket was the issue. It was good quality, but structured to accommodate something underneath it on the left side. Audrey clocked this the way she clocked everything, without stopping, without changing her expression. She was writing in a chart at the nursing station when Pratt passed, and she tracked him in her peripheral vision while her pen kept moving. He went straight to the corridor outside 714. He spoke briefly to one of the fake security guards. The guard nodded. Pratt and his 2 companions went inside. They were in there for 9 minutes. When Pratt came back out, his expression had tightened in a way that didn't match whatever a routine administrative visit should look like. He said something to the guard that Audrey couldn't hear, and the guard pulled out his phone immediately. She finished the chart, started a new one, kept watching. Pratt noticed her at 6:02. She was checking the supply cart at the edge of the corridor, legitimately, because 2 of her patients needed materials for morning dressing changes, and she was verifying inventory while she had a free moment. She wasn't looking at him. She didn't need to. "You." He said it the way people say it when they want you to feel small before the conversation even starts. "Nurse, what's your name?" She turned. "Voss. Audrey Voss. Why are you in this hallway?" "Supply inventory. I'm assigned to the 700 wing." "The 700 wing is back there." He pointed in the direction she'd come from. "The supply cart serves both sides of the floor." He looked at her the way people look at something they're considering moving out of their way. Then he looked at the woman with the portfolio. "Get her supervisor." "Mr. Pratt," Audrey started, "I don't need you to speak." He said it calmly, which was worse than if he'd raised his voice. "I need you to stand there until your supervisor arrives and then go wherever she tells you to go." Margaret Solis appeared 3 minutes later, the particular look on her face of someone who had been summoned by someone important and was already calculating how to contain damage. "Ms. Solis," Pratt didn't bother with pleasantries, "is this nurse assigned to the restricted wing?" "She's assigned to 700 through 710, sir. She shouldn't be past the supply junction." "I was at the supply junction," Audrey said. "Audrey," Solis's voice had that particular flatness. "Stop talking." "She's been in this corridor twice in the last hour," said the man in the ill-fitting jacket. He was the one who hadn't spoken yet, which meant he was the one paying the most attention. "I noticed her on the first pass." The fact that he'd noticed her meant he was better than she'd initially assessed. She adjusted her read on him. "Ms. Solis," Pratt said, "please reassign this nurse to a different floor for the remainder of the shift. I don't want her in this wing." "Of course. If she has a problem with that, she can take it up with HR in the morning." He said the last part looking directly at Audrey, making sure she understood the full implication of it. She looked back at him, said nothing. That seemed to annoy him more than an argument would have. She was reassigned to the 3rd floor, orthopedics, which was as far from the 7th as you could get while still being inside the building. Solis walked her to the elevator without speaking, and in the elevator she said quietly, "Don't." "Don't what?" "Whatever you're thinking, don't." "I'm not thinking anything," Solis looked at her sideways. "You've got that look." "I've got a neutral expression." "You've got a neutral expression that means you're thinking something." The elevator opened on 3. "Audrey, I'm serious. Pratt has been in a mood for 3 days, and I don't know what's going on with that patient upstairs, but whatever it is, it's above our level. Stay on 3. Do your job. Go home." Audrey stepped off the elevator. I always do my job. Solis looked at her for a moment longer than necessary, then let the doors close. Orthopedics on the third floor was quiet. Post-surgical patients, mostly. Recovery cases. The work was careful and methodical and didn't require the same pitched alertness as the seventh floor, and Audrey moved through it with the competence of someone doing something physical while their mind was somewhere else entirely. She thought about the guards. She thought about Pratt's face when he came out of 714. She thought about the man in the jacket and the fact that he'd clocked her movement without appearing to watch her, which was a specific skill that took specific training. She thought about the patient, mid-40s, lean, GSW to the shoulder, which was survivable with the right treatment and not the kind of wound that put someone in a long recovery unless there were complications. He'd been admitted 36 hours ago, transferred from a smaller facility in the county, which was unusual. Smaller facilities typically sent GSW cases to Billings, not Carver's Reach. Someone had specifically routed this man to Harlow Valley. She thought about why someone would do that. She thought about the phone call the fake security guard had made. At 7:15, she took her break in the third-floor staff lounge and sat with a cup of coffee she didn't drink and stared at the wall for 4 minutes. Then she went to find a direct line to the 7th floor that wasn't the elevator. The stairwell between floors 3 and 7 was technically accessible from both ends, but practically never used. Staff used the elevators, visitors used the main stairs near the lobby, and the utilitarian concrete stairwell in the east wing existed mostly for fire egress and the rare occasion when someone needed to move equipment without waiting for a lift. Audrey had used it twice before, both times during genuine emergencies when elevator wait times were unacceptable. She used her badge to access the 7th floor landing and eased the door open 2 inches. The corridor was different than it had been an hour ago. There were 4 guards now instead of 2. One at the door to 714, one at the far end of the corridor near the window, one positioned at the nursing station junction, and one, the man in the jacket, standing at the opposite stairwell door in a position that covered the entire length of the hall. 4-point coverage of a single patient room. Whatever was happening inside that room, someone had decided in the last hour that 2 points weren't enough. She let the door close silently. She stood in the stairwell and thought about it. The honest assessment, she had seen something that looked wrong, and her history made her read things a certain way that most people wouldn't. She could be misreading this. The patient could be someone important in a legitimate way. A political figure, a federal witness in protective custody, someone whose security requirements were simply more complex than she'd assumed. The honest counter-assessment. Protective custody patients came with law enforcement presence, and law enforcement presence looked a specific way. It had protocols and identifiers and coordinated communication with hospital administration that followed documented procedures. What she was seeing didn't look like any of that. It looked like people who were trying to look like protective custody while actually being something else. She'd seen that specific gap before. She thought about the patient's eyes, tracking the room. He knew. Whatever was happening, he knew he was in danger. She pulled her phone and considered calling someone. The problem with that was she had no one specific to call. She was a nurse on reassignment who had been explicitly told to stay away from the 7th floor, and anything she said would be filtered through the fact that she'd already irritated the chief administrator tonight. She had no authority, no standing, and no concrete evidence. Just a read on body language and a bad feeling in her chest that she had learned a long time ago to trust absolutely. She needed to get into that room. Not for any heroic reason, not because she had a plan, because the man in that room might be the only person in the building right now who understood what she understood, and if she could confirm that in the next 30 seconds, she'd know what to do next. She didn't go through the door. She went to the supply corridor that ran parallel to the main hall, a narrow service passage used by housekeeping and equipment transport, accessible from a coded panel that maintenance staff and senior nursing personnel had clearance to open. She'd been a senior floor nurse for 3 years. Her clearance was still valid because nobody had thought to revoke it when they moved her to a different floor. People overlooked administrative details when they were in a hurry. The service corridor came out at a utility door opposite room 714. From that position, with the door cracked 2 inches, she had a sight line directly through the wire glass window of the patient room. The man was awake. He was lying in the bed with his arm immobilized and his vitals on the monitor, but his head was turned slightly away from the door, positioned to look like a resting patient to anyone checking from the main corridor while keeping his sight line on the window. He was watching the glass. He saw her. She watched his face. Not a flicker of surprise. Not alarm. He'd known someone was there before she appeared, had been tracking sound or movement or some other indicator that she'd given off without meaning to. His eyes settled on her and held, and she saw him make the assessment. Unfamiliar face, not one of them. Civilian clothes under the nursing coat, posture that didn't match the rest of the staff. She had 4 seconds, maybe less, before the guard at the door would make another circuit. She raised her right hand, kept it below the level of the utility door frame. 2 fingers, index and middle, pressed flat, and then separated in a slow V, then a tap of the index finger twice against the heel of her hand. It was a field recognition signal, one that had been designed inside a specific operational context that most people had never heard of and couldn't have decoded if they'd been watching for an hour. The patient's stillness changed quality. It was subtle, the kind of thing you'd have to know to see. His breathing didn't shift. His expression didn't change. But something in his eyes did, and it wasn't surprise or confusion. It was recognition. He raised his uninjured right hand slowly, as if adjusting the blanket. 2 fingers pressed flat for a fraction of a second. Confirmed. Status. Compromised. Extraction needed. She let the door close. She was already moving. She was on the landing between 6 and 7, phone in hand, when she heard the door above her open. Footsteps on concrete. More than one person, moving fast. She kept walking down. On 5, she stopped and made the call. The number she dialed had been in her phone for 4 years without her ever using it, under the contact name Westbrook PM, an innocuous label that meant nothing to anyone who might see it. It rang twice. A man answered, "Yeah, this is Voss. Audrey Voss. I need a relay to Tactical Coordination, GSW, patient at Harlow Valley Medical in Carver's Reach, Montana, room 714. Building is compromised. Internal security is not internal." A pause. 3 seconds. Authentication. She gave it. A sequence of numbers and a phrase that she had memorized 4 years ago and had never once had cause to use. When she was done, the line was quiet for another 2 seconds. Hold. She held. 40 seconds passed. A different voice came on. Female, clipped, operating with the efficiency of someone already moving. Voss, we have an active file on the Harlow Valley subject. Are you confirmed inside the facility? 3rd floor. I was reassigned out of the 7th ward an hour ago. 4-point coverage outside 714, none of it legitimate. I made visual contact with the subject and established recognition. He confirmed compromise. Copy that. What's your assessment of timeline? She thought about Pratt's face. The phone call. The shift from 2 guards to 4 in under an hour. Something changed in the last 60 minutes. They're accelerating. If there's a planned extraction on your end, you're running short. Copy. Voss, do not re-engage. We will handle from here. Understood. Stay off the 7th floor. Understood. She ended the call, stood in the stairwell on the 5th floor landing with her back against the concrete wall and her heart moving faster than she wanted it to. 4 years since she had done anything like that. 4 years of hospital floors and medication charts and the specific texture of a life that asked nothing of her except competence. She thought she'd outrun this. She went back to orthopedics, changed a dressing, checked on a post-hip replacement patient who was anxious about weight bearing and spent 8 minutes reassuring him in terms that were honest rather than optimistic. Wrote notes. Did the work. At 8:34, Douglas Pratt appeared in the 3rd floor corridor. He had the woman with the portfolio and the man in the jacket, and behind them were 2 men she hadn't seen before. Harlow Valley security badges, but the same wrongness in how they stood. He stopped when he saw her. Miss Voss. His voice had changed from the earlier transaction. It had gone somewhere colder. Why don't you come with us? She looked at him, then at the 2 new men, then back at him. Is there a problem? There's a conversation we need to have. Administrative. He said the word like it meant something else. Please come with us. The nursing aide at the station, a young woman named Becca, who was 22 and still believed in the basic logic of institutions, looked up with the expression of someone trying to figure out if she should do something. Audrey gave her a look that said, "Stay where you are." Then she said to Pratt, "Of course, go on." They took her to a conference room on the second floor, not an administrative office, a conference room, which meant they wanted a closed door in a space with no specific ownership. The woman with the portfolio sat at the table and opened it. The man in the jacket stood near the door. The two new men positioned themselves in a way that was unmistakably not about comfort. Pratt sat across from her. "You made a phone call," he said. She looked at him. "I make a lot of phone calls." "From the east stairwell, 5th floor landing, 8 minutes after you were seen accessing the service corridor on the 7th floor. He folded his hands on the table. "We have cameras, Ms. Voss." "I'm aware hospitals have cameras. You were on a floor you had no authorized reason to be on." "I was in a stairwell," she said. "The stairwell is accessible from every floor." "Who did you call?" She looked at him steadily. "I don't think I'm required to share my personal calls with hospital administration." Something shifted in the room. Not dramatic, just a quality change, the kind that happened when a situation stopped being a negotiation and became something else. "Ms. Voss," Pratt's voice had dropped another register. "I'm going to be very direct with you. There are things happening in this facility tonight that are sensitive. Sensitive in ways that I need you to understand require absolute discretion. What you may have seen on the 7th floor, I saw a supply corridor and a stairwell, is part of an operation that is authorized at a level well above this hospital. What I need from you is your assurance that you understand what's at stake if you've done something that interferes with that operation." She listened to the full shape of what he was saying, authorized at a level above this hospital. Not legal, not legitimate, just above. "I understand what's at stake," she said. "Good." He seemed to relax slightly. "Then we can—" "Do you?" He stopped. She kept her voice completely even. "Do you understand what's at stake, Mr. Pratt? Because I want to make sure we're having the same conversation." The man in the jacket pushed off from the wall. Pratt raised one hand, a small gesture, and the man stopped. "I think," Pratt said slowly, "that you should take some time off, effective immediately. With pay, we can make this transition comfortable. You've been with this hospital for 4 years, you have a good record, and there's no reason this needs to become adversarial." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're terminating me. I'm suggesting you take some personal time." From a conference room on a Saturday night with 4 security personnel present, she let that sit in the air. "Understood." She stood up. Nobody stopped her. The man in the jacket tracked her movement but didn't act. Pratt watched her with the expression of a man who had already moved on to calculating the next problem. She picked up her badge, looked at it, set it on the table. "I'll get my things," she said. She walked out of the conference room down the corridor toward the staff locker area and did not look back. In her chest, her heart was doing something complicated. Not fear. She'd processed fear into something more functional a long time ago. It was closer to the feeling of watching a timer and knowing exactly how much of it was left. She had made the call. 47 minutes ago, someone on the other end of that line had said hold and then put a different voice on. Female, efficient, already moving. "If there's a planned extraction on your end, you're running short. Copy." She retrieved her bag from the locker, changed out of her nursing clogs into her regular shoes, and pulled on her jacket. From the locker room, she could not see or hear anything happening on the 7th floor. The building was quiet in the way it got around 8:30 on a weeknight, the daytime energy having bled out and the night shift settling into its particular rhythm. She zipped her bag. She did not leave. Instead, she went to the 3rd floor nursing station, found Becca still on shift, and said, "I need you to do something for me." Becca looked alarmed. "You're still here?" "For a few more minutes. If anything happens in the building tonight, anything unusual, alarms, movement, anything at all, I need you to make sure your patients are away from windows and in the most interior positions their rooms allow. Can you do that?" Becca stared at her. "Audrey, can you do it?" A pause. Then, Yeah, I can do it." "Good." She went to the stairwell. She sat on the 4th floor landing in the dark, with her bag and her jacket, and the particular stillness of someone who had done this kind of waiting before. Not comfortable waiting, not patient waiting. The waiting that happened when you had done everything you could do and the next part was out of your hands. Her phone showed 8:51 p.m. She thought about the patient in room 714, the way his eyes had settled on her and the quality of recognition in them. Two people who spoke a language nobody else in the building knew, connecting across a wire glass window in the middle of a situation that was moving toward a cliff edge. She thought about Pratt telling her there was no reason this needed to become adversarial. She thought about the phone ringing twice before the man answered. Yeah. At 8:58 p.m., she felt more than heard something change in the building. A vibration, almost subliminal, coming through the concrete of the stairwell wall. And then, unmistakably, the sound of movement above her. Multiple points, rapid and coordinated, coming from outside the building. She pressed back against the wall. 3 seconds later, the 7th floor of Harlow Valley Medical Center came apart at the windows. The sound came in layers. First the glass? Not a single break, but a staggered sequence. 4 distinct explosions of it across maybe 3 seconds. The kind of spread that meant multiple entry points hit simultaneously by people who had rehearsed the timing. Then the concussion of something tactical, not lethal, designed to disorient. She felt the pressure of it even 4 floors down, a physical thump against her eardrums that made her teeth ache. Then voices, amplified and directional, cutting through the chaos above. Federal agents, get down, do not move, federal agents. Then gunfire. 2 shots. A pause. 1 more. She was already moving before the echo of the 3rd cleared. She didn't go up. That was the instinct she had to consciously override. The pull toward the action, toward being useful in the middle of it. Instead, she went down, fast, 2 steps at a time to the 2nd floor landing, and came out into the administrative corridor at a controlled walk because running drew attention, and right now she didn't know who else in this building was one of them. The 2nd floor was in early chaos, not the organized fear of a building that knew what was happening, the confused animal fear of a building that heard something terrible and didn't have context for it. A woman in business casual was pressed against the wall near the elevator with her phone out, not calling anyone, just holding it. 2 men from the billing department had come out of their office and were standing in the doorway looking at the ceiling as if they could see through it. A janitor had stopped his cart and was completely still, the mop handle gripped in both hands. Audrey went to the woman first. "Interior rooms," she said. "Away from windows. Go." The woman stared at her. "What's happening?" "I don't know yet. Move away from the windows." The billing staff were easier. One of them had the look of someone who'd done military service and was already processing the sounds analytically rather than emotionally. She made eye contact with him. "Get everyone on this floor to the interior conference rooms. No windows. Stay low. Don't use the elevators." He nodded once. That was enough. She kept moving. The administrative area fed into a junction that connected to the main lobby corridor and the east wing separately. She needed to find the hospital's incident command position. Every facility had a protocol for exactly this scenario, a designated assembly point, and a chain of command for emergencies. And wherever that was, it was where she needed to be. She already knew it wasn't where it was supposed to be. Harlow Valley's emergency operations plan designated the security office on the ground floor as Incident Command for Internal Emergencies. She'd read the plan during her orientation 4 years ago and hadn't thought about it since. The problem was that the security office was currently staffed by people who were not hospital security, and the actual tactical operation was happening 7 floors above her head. And whatever official response the hospital thought it was mounting would be operating on the wrong information about what kind of emergency this actually was. She needed a phone that wasn't her cell. She found one at the nursing station on 2. A landline, old infrastructure, still connected to an internal system that hadn't been fully modernized. She picked it up and dialed the operator. "This is Nurse Voss. I'm on the 2nd floor. I need to reach the charge nurse on 7. A pause. "Ma'am, we're in emergency lockdown." "I know. That's why I need 7. Can you connect me?" Another pause. Then a ring. It connected to a handset that someone picked up on the 2nd ring. She could hear everything in the background, voices and movement, and something that might have been someone crying. "This is Novak." A man's voice, controlled but tight. "Novak, this is Voss. I'm a nurse. I was on 7 earlier tonight. What's your status? Who are you? I'm someone who can help you sort out what's happening. What's your status? A beat. We've got federal agents on the floor. They came through the windows. 4 of our security personnel are... He stopped. 3 are in custody. One was shot. Patients? We're moving them. The agents are helping. He exhaled. It's controlled. It's more controlled than it sounds. Okay, listen to me. The incident command in the security office is compromised. Whoever is in that office right now is not your legitimate security staff. Do not route any hospital communications through them, and do not let them access the PA system. Silence. Novak. How do you know that? Because I've been watching the security staff on 7 for 3 hours, and they're not who their badges say they are. Get that information to whoever's running the federal team on your floor. Can you do that? Yeah, I can do that. Good. She hung up. She stood at the nursing station and let herself think for 10 seconds. A discipline she'd learned in a different life. The practice of taking the full 10 when everything in your system was pushing you to act on incomplete information. The operation on 7 was running. Whatever she'd set in motion with that phone call 40-some minutes ago had arrived on schedule, which meant the tactical team had been closer than she'd realized, probably pre-positioned somewhere in the city while the file on room 714 developed. That was the piece she hadn't calculated. She'd told the woman on the phone that they were running short on time, and the response had been to compress whatever staging remained and move. Which meant her call had accelerated the timeline. Which meant that the 3 shots she'd heard, the 2 and then the pause and then the 1, had happened partly because of her. She sat with that for the remaining 7 seconds of her 10. Then she moved. The ground floor was a different species of chaos than the second. The ER was the natural collection point for anyone in the building who didn't know where to go, and it had become exactly that. Staff from multiple departments, visitors who'd been in the building when the lockdown hit, patients from the first-floor units who'd been ambulatory enough to move. The ER charge nurse, a heavy-set man named Dowd, whom Audrey knew by sight, was managing it with the specific competence of someone whose baseline was controlled emergency and who had simply scaled up. She went to him directly. Dowd, the security office is compromised. He looked at her. He was in the middle of 3 things at once, and the look he gave her communicated all of that, but he didn't dismiss her. Meaning what? Meaning whoever answered when you called security tonight is not your security staff. They may have given you bad information about the lockdown protocol. I haven't called security. Good. Keep it that way. The federal team on 7 is the legitimate authority in this building right now. If you can reach them, route everything through them. How do I reach a federal tactical team? They'll come to you when the floor is secured. Until then, she looked at the room, at the 50-some people in various states of distress and confusion. You're doing the right thing. Keep doing it. He studied her for a moment. You were on 7 tonight. I was reassigned off 7 an hour ago. Pratt's doing? Something in his voice when he said Pratt's name made her pause. You've had concerns about Pratt. I've had concerns for about 8 months. He said it flatly, not as a confession, just a statement of record. Nothing I could put my hands on, but yeah. She filed that. Keep your people calm and keep them away from the security office. That's the job right now. She left him to it. The administrative corridor that connected the main building to the East Wing was empty. Everyone had either sheltered in place or moved toward the ER, and the hallway had the particular emptiness of a space that was usually populated. Emergency lighting had kicked in sometime in the last few minutes, casting everything in a slightly flatter tone that made the familiar look strange. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. The man in the jacket, Pratt's man, the one who'd clocked her movement on the 7th floor and who'd been in the conference room when Pratt delivered his termination by other name, was 20 feet behind her and closing. He wasn't running. He was walking with the deliberate pace of someone who didn't need to run because the geometry of the situation was already in his favor. He had his right hand at his hip. "Ms. Voss," he said it conversationally. She turned fully to face him, kept her weight even. "You should stop where you are." "I don't think so." He kept walking. "We had a deal. You were leaving." "I changed my mind. That's going to be a problem. He was 15 feet now. I need to know what you said on that phone call. And I need to know who you called. You've got a lot going on upstairs to worry about. That's being handled. He stopped at 10 feet. You made things complicated tonight. I want to understand how complicated. She looked at his hand, then at his face. You're going to draw that weapon in a hospital corridor. I'm going to ask you some questions. With your hand on your weapon. It's precautionary. She almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, because the word precautionary in the mouth of someone doing exactly what he was doing had the specific absurdity of institutional language being used to describe an act that had nothing institutional about it. Here's what I think, she said. I think whatever they told you was happening upstairs tonight is not what's actually happening. I think the people you work for told you this was a clean operation with predictable outcomes. And I think that's not how it's going. And I think you are standing in an empty hospital corridor, making a decision that is going to define the rest of your life in the next about 15 seconds. He looked at her. She looked back. Walk away, she said. Right now. That's the only version of tonight that ends okay for you. Something moved behind his eyes. Not capitulation. She didn't mistake it for that. More like recalculation. He was running numbers, the way people did when a situation they thought they had mapped suddenly showed them new dimensions. His hand came away from his hip. Who are you? He said. It wasn't the same question as before. It had lost the tactical edge and become something more genuinely uncertain. I'm a nurse, she said, and I need to get back to my patients. She walked past him. Her shoulder blades were very aware of where he was for the full length of the corridor. He didn't follow. She found out later that 3 things happened in the 12 minutes after she walked away from Pratt's man. The first, the tactical team on 7 completed their sweep and secured the floor with 2 of the false security personnel in custody, 1 in the corridor and 2 others who had been positioned outside the stairwell doors and had attempted to exit through the roof. The roof team had been anticipated. They did not make it to the roof. The second, the patient in room 714, whose real name was Marcus Teller, Deputy U.S. Marshal, 14 years on the job, currently the primary witness in a federal racketeering case involving financial crimes routed through legitimate medical institutions across 6 states, was extracted from his room with his IV still running and his monitors alarming into an empty hall, moved to a secondary secure location within the building while the floor was being swept. He was, by all accounts, conscious, stable, and furious that it had taken this long. The third, Douglas Pratt was found in his administrative office on the 4th floor, not attempting to flee, not on the phone, not doing anything that looked like the behavior of a guilty man. He was sitting at his desk with his jacket on and his hands folded, and the expression of someone who had already talked to a lawyer and was now performing whatever posture that lawyer had advised. It was the performance that gave him away more than anything else. Audrey didn't know any of this in real time. She knew it the way you know most things in the middle of a crisis, in fragments, relayed through hallways and handsets, and the faces of people who had just received information and were still processing it. She was back in the ER when the first federal agent came through the main entrance from the building interior, moving at a pace that was fast without being frantic, wearing tactical gear with a federal identifier on the chest panel. He went directly to Dowd. Audrey watched from across the room. The conversation was brief. She could read enough of Dowd's face to understand the shape of it. Confirmation of the lockdown status, information exchange, the agent asking specific questions, and Dowd answering them. At one point, Dowd turned and looked across the room at her. The agent followed his gaze. He walked over. Voss? Yes. Agent Sal DeMarco, Federal Organized Crime Task Force. He was maybe 35, dark-haired, with the kind of face that had been weathered by things he wasn't going to describe to someone he'd just met. You called in the compromise. I did. We need you upstairs. She looked at him. I was terminated an hour ago. That's going to be somebody else's problem to sort out. He was already moving. Can you come now? She went. The 7th floor looked like the aftermath of something that had been fast and loud and was now settling into the particular stillness of a scene being documented. Evidence markers dotted the corridor. Glass had been swept to the edges, but not removed. The nursing station had been converted into an impromptu command position, with 2 agents working laptops and a radio setup that had been brought in with the tactical team. The charge nurse, Novak, the voice on the phone, was a compact man in his early 50s who was sitting in a chair near the station with the expression of someone who had been running on emergency adrenaline for the last 30 minutes and was now feeling the first edges of the crash. When he saw Audrey come off the elevator with DeMarco, something in his face shifted. "You're Voss," he said. "I'm Voss. You were the one who called." "I was." He looked at her for a moment with something complicated moving across his face. Not gratitude exactly, too raw for that, and the night wasn't over yet. More like the reassessment that happened when you realized a person was not what you'd categorize them as. "You were on shift. I remember you. You kept trying to get near 714. I kept noticing things that were wrong." "Yeah," he exhaled. "Yeah, they were wrong." DeMarco led her past the nursing station to a section of corridor that had been cleared and was now serving as an informal briefing space. A woman was there, 30s, civilian clothes under a tactical vest, dark hair pulled back with the kind of practicality that said she hadn't thought about her hair in several hours. She had a tablet and a notepad and the focused economy of movement that meant she was senior to most people in the room without needing to signal it. "Special Agent Renata Muro," DeMarco said. "She's running the operation." Muro looked up from the tablet. Her eyes moved over Audrey in a single pass that cataloged things without being obvious about it. "Voss, I was on your call." "I know," Audrey said. "You were the one who said copy." Twice. The corner of Muro's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "You gave us an accurate assessment. The timeline compression was the right call. We'd been staging for an 11 p.m. entry point, and if we'd held to that, Teller would have been dead by 10:30. We had intelligence that something was moving, but not how close." "He was already in the room when I made contact," Audrey said. "Whatever they were waiting for had already started." "The trigger was Pratt." Muro set the tablet down. "He made a call at 5:53 p.m. to a number associated with the network. We picked it up, but the decision point was already in motion by the time our analysis came back. Your call gave us the ground-level confirmation that we'd been trying to get through signals for 6 hours." Audrey absorbed this. The man in the jacket, Pratt's man, he was in the administrative corridor about, "We have him," DeMarco. "He was at the east exit when our secondary team came through. Hands up, no resistance." "He was making a decision," she said. "When I talked to him, I don't know which way he was going to go." "He went the right way," Muro said, "which is interesting. We'll find out what that means." Audrey looked down the corridor. Through the wire glass window of room 714, she could see the room was empty now. Stripped bed, monitoring equipment still connected to nothing, the particular vacancy of a space someone had occupied intensely and then left. "Teller," she said. "He's okay?" "He'll be okay. He was already losing ground before tonight. The wound wasn't the issue. It was what they'd been doing to his treatment protocol. Medication interactions that looked accidental." Muro said it in the tone of someone who had already spent time being very angry about this and had moved into operational language to manage it. "He's with our medical personnel now." Audrey thought about that. About someone doing that to a patient deliberately and methodically, using a hospital, the specific calibrated trust of a hospital, as the mechanism. The anger that moved through her was clean and direct, and she let it go without showing it. "What do you need from me?" she said. Muro picked the tablet back up. "Your account of the evening, everything. What you observed, when, the specific sequencing of the security positioning, the content of Pratt's conversation with you, what you saw in the service corridor when you made contact with Teller, all of it. That's going to take some time. We have time now. There are still patients on this floor who need nursing care." Muro paused at that, looked at her again. "Noted. We'll work around your patient obligations." It was a small thing, but Muro had said it without hesitation, and it was the right answer. The answer that recognized that the building was still a hospital with people in it who hadn't been part of any of this and still needed what hospitals were for. Audrey sat down at the nursing station chair that Novak had vacated and started from the beginning. "Bess," She talked for 40 minutes. DeMarco took notes, and Muro asked questions that were specific and well-ordered, following a line of inquiry that told Audrey something about the shape of the larger case, the network that used legitimate institutions as financial infrastructure, the length of time it had been operating, the specific vulnerability of hospital administration to a particular kind of pressure and persuasion. She answered what she could and said clearly when she wasn't certain, and she kept the emotional register of her account flat and accurate because she'd learned a long time ago that flat and accurate was more useful than dramatic and compelling. Somewhere in the 25th minute, a nurse she didn't know, young, clearly shaken, still in her scrubs from the shift, appeared in the doorway of the corridor and looked at Novak with an expression that was trying to hold together. "Mr. Novak, Mrs. Kepler in 709 is asking for her pain medication, and her chart says, I can't tell if the order was modified because the system's been..." Novak was already getting up. Audrey said, 702 has the same issue. The medication orders for the whole wing were probably flagged during the lockdown. She said it to the young nurse directly. Pull the last confirmed order from the physical chart in the rack. There should be a backup hard copy for exactly this. Cross-reference with the time the lockdown started. Anything before that timestamp is valid. The nurse looked at her, then at Novak. "She's right," Novak said. "Do it." The young nurse disappeared. Muro had watched the exchange. She said nothing, but she made a note on her tablet. Audrey finished her account at the 40-minute mark. Muro went through a short sequence of follow-up questions, precise, tactical, filling gaps, and then sat back. "There's something I need to tell you," Muro said. Audrey waited. Douglas Pratt has been providing the network with access to patient records for 14 months. Not just financial routing, medical records. Specifically the records of patients who were identified as potential federal witnesses or law enforcement personnel recovering at this facility. She said it with the same level tone she'd used for everything else. Teller wasn't the first person they targeted here. He was the first one they didn't finish. The stairwell, the service corridor, the wire glass window. She thought about all the patients on the 7th floor over 14 months who she hadn't known about. There were others, she said, 2. Both ruled accidental at the time. Muro's voice didn't waver. The investigation has been open for 8 months. Tonight closes a significant portion of it. Audrey sat with that. "I've been working in this hospital for 4 years," she said. "I know. For the last 14 months, someone has been using it to kill people." Yes. She thought about Dowd saying, "I've had concerns for about 8 months." She thought about Solis saying, "Whatever it is, it's above our level." She thought about all the moments when the thing that was wrong had been close enough to see, and she hadn't had the full picture to understand what she was looking at. "I want to know their names," she said. "The 2 patients." Muro looked at her steadily. "That's not information I can release right now." "I know. I'm telling you that when this is resolved, I want to know their names." A pause. "I'll see what I can do." It wasn't a yes, but Muro said it in a way that meant she'd actually thought about it rather than dismissing it, and that was enough for now. DeMarco's radio crackled. He stepped away. When he came back, something in his face had changed. Not alarmed, but sharpened, the look of new information that had come in ahead of schedule. He looked at Muro. "Pratt's talking," he said. Muro was already standing. To who? Himself, mostly. The agent with him says he just started. Hasn't asked for anything, hasn't requested counsel again, just started talking. DeMarco's voice had the careful neutrality of someone not yet sure what to make of something. He's naming people. Muro picked up her tablet and her radio. She looked at Audrey once, quick, assessing, the way she'd looked at her the first time. "Stay available," she said. Then she was gone down the corridor and DeMarco was right behind her, and Audrey was alone at the nursing station on the 7th floor of a hospital where the glass was still on the edges of the hall and the patients still needed their medication orders sorted and the night was not close to over. She pulled on a pair of gloves, picked up the first chart from the rack. She was halfway through the third chart when her phone buzzed in her pocket. Not a call, a text. From a number she didn't recognize, 9 digits in a format that wasn't standard. She opened it. "Teller wants to speak with you. Room 3B, East Annex. Come alone if you can." She read it twice. The East Annex on the third floor was a section of the building she'd never had reason to go to. Administrative overflow, mostly empty since a departmental reorganization 2 years ago. Not a patient care area, not anywhere that appeared in standard hospital routing, which meant whoever had moved Teller had chosen it specifically because it wasn't on any standard map of the building's operational spaces. She put her phone back in her pocket. She finished the third chart, made a note for Novak about the medication flag on 708. Then she took off the gloves and walked toward the elevator. The East Annex on the third floor smelled like disuse, that specific staleness of a space that had HVAC running through it, but no people to circulate the air properly. The overhead fluorescents were on a motion sensor, and they flickered to life as she pushed through the door from the main corridor, catching the edge of her movement and deciding, after a half-second delay, that she was worth illuminating. The hallway was nothing. Drop ceiling, scuffed baseboards, a row of doors that had paper labels from the reorganization still stuck to them. Overflow records, admin services B, medical staff credentialing. And at the far end, a door with no label and a light visible under it. She walked toward it. Her shoes were quiet on the linoleum. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way that wasn't panic, but was adjacent to it. The body's honest response to walking toward an unknown room in an empty corridor because a text from an unrecognized number told her to. She had done more tactically inadvisable things in her life, but she'd done all of them with backup and training and situational context that this moment didn't have. She knocked twice. A pause. Then, it's open. The room had been a conference space before the reorganization, and someone had pushed the remaining furniture to the walls. 2 folding tables, a stack of chairs, to clear the center. A cot had been set up there, and on it, Marcus Teller was sitting upright with his left arm in a fresh immobilizer and a saline drip running into his right forearm from a portable stand. A federal agent she didn't recognize sat in a folding chair near the door, and he stood when she came in with his hand moving toward his hip before stopping. "She's clear," Teller said. His voice was rougher than she'd expected, the way voices got when a body had been running low on resources for a while. "Leave us for 10 minutes. The agent looked at him. "Marshall." 10 minutes. Right outside the door. The agent left. Teller looked at her in the silence that followed. He was older than she'd calibrated from the glimpses through the wire glass. 48, maybe 50. The lines in his face deeper than his age because of the kind of work that aged you unevenly, accumulating around the eyes and the jaw. His color was better than it had been in room 714, but it still had the dullness of someone running on a blood deficit and inadequate rest. The shoulder wound was dressed under his gown, and she could see from the way he held himself that the real pain was in the back of the shoulder where the exit damage would be. Not the entry, which was always cleaner, but the exit, which was always honest about what a projectile actually did to tissue. He said, "You know the signal from Veracruz." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said. "Only 4 people designed that protocol." He studied her. "You're not Marcus Webb. You're not Linda Park. And the 3rd is dead." "I worked with all 3 of them," she said. "I was the 4th. He sat with that. "Voss. Audrey Voss. The comms specialist." Something moved across his face. Recognition recalibrating into a more specific shape. "Webb talked about you once. Said you designed the secondary recognition tree." "I designed most of it." She crossed the room and stood near the cot, looking at the IV line without touching it. "Your drip rate is off. You're getting this too fast for your current blood pressure." He looked at the line. "You can tell that from looking at it?" "I can tell from the way you look." She adjusted the roller clamp without asking his permission, slowing the flow to something that wouldn't drive his pressure up when his vasculature was already doing compensatory work. "You wanted to talk to me." "I wanted to see who you were." He watched her hands on the IV. "And I wanted to tell you something before it gets complicated." "It's already complicated." "More complicated." He shifted his weight, and the movement cost him something he didn't show in his face, but she could see in the brief tension around his eyes. "Pratt talking isn't good news. Not the way Muro thinks it is." She looked at him. "Explain that." "Pratt's talking because someone told him to. He's not breaking. He's performing. The network has a specific protocol when an arrest happens at an operational level. The mid-level contact talks early, gives up names, creates noise. Investigators spend time on those names. And while they're spending that time, he paused. The actual nodes are relocating. She understood immediately. He's a distraction. He's a very good one. 14 months of real information in his head, and he's releasing it in a specific sequence that sounds like someone finally telling the truth. Teller's voice was flat and tired and precise. I know, because I watched them do it in Harrisburg 2 years ago. By the time we realized what was happening, 3 of the primary operatives had crossed state lines, and the financial architecture had been restructured through 3 new entities. She thought about Muro walking fast down the corridor, her tablet, her radio, the focused energy of someone following a thread. She doesn't know. She may figure it out. She's good. I've worked adjacent to her task force before. But the Pratt information is going to feel like the case breaking open, and that feeling is going to cost time. He looked at the door. I've been trying to reach my department's intelligence coordinator for the last 40 minutes. My phone's been locked by protocol since the extraction, and the agent outside that door has his orders, and his orders don't include letting me use communications equipment. She understood why he was telling her all of this. You need me to reach someone. Well, I need you to reach someone who isn't inside this building's operational chain right now, because if I'm right about the distraction protocol, at least one person in this building's chain is feeding information back about how fast the investigation is moving. He said it without emphasis, just the weight of the fact itself. I can't prove that, but I've been in this room for an hour with nothing to do but think, and I know what I know. She pulled out her phone. Give me the number. She was in the women's restroom at the end of the East Annex corridor. Private, no cameras, signal adequate. When she made the call. The number Teller had given her rang 4 times before it connected to a voicemail that identified itself only as a federal department extension number and asked for a message. She left one. Specific, brief, using the operational framing Teller had told her. Pratt's disclosure was patterned, not spontaneous. Timeline of naming sequence matched Harrisburg protocol. Primary nodes potentially mobile. Requesting immediate verification of financial entity movement in the last 90 minutes. She ended the call and looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, something she hadn't done in hours. She looked like someone who'd been awake for a long time doing difficult things, which was accurate. There was a small cut on her jaw she didn't remember getting, probably from when she'd pressed close to a door edge in the service corridor. Her hair had come half out of its tie. She didn't fix any of it. When she came back to the conference room, the agent outside the door had been joined by a second one, and both of them looked at her with the particular wariness of people who'd been told someone had access they weren't entirely sure about. She went past them without speaking. Teller was still upright on the cot. His color had improved slightly from the adjusted drip, which was a small mechanical satisfaction. Done, she said. Thank you. She checked his pulse at the wrist. Not because she needed the number, but because she wanted to feel the quality of it. It was steadier than she expected. He was running on less than he should have been and holding together with the specific stubbornness of someone who had decided not to fall apart until he had permission to. You should lie down, she said. I will. You won't. He almost smiled at that. Probably not. He looked at his hand, the one she'd just released. The signal. When you flashed it, I wasn't sure the first half second. I thought I was reading it wrong. I've been in that room for 36 hours thinking everyone in this building was part of it. Not everyone. No, not you. He paused. What made you look twice? At the guards. She considered how to answer that honestly without making it sound like more than it was. The way they distributed their weight. Security personnel on a stationary post after a few hours start leaning. One hip, then the other. Small, unconscious adjustments. Yours weren't doing that. That's a very specific thing to notice. I noticed specific things. What else? The one in the jacket tracked me without appearing to watch me. That's trained behavior, not learned on the job behavior. She shrugged slightly. And you? Me? Your eyes. You were reading the room the way people do when they know something's wrong, and they're waiting for it. She moved to the chair the first agent had vacated, sat down. Her feet hurt in a way that had gone past sensation back to being a fact again. You knew they weren't going to let you walk out of there. I'd known for about 12 hours. He said it without self-pity, just precision. After the second medication error, the first one I thought was incompetence. The second one, the specific combination they gave me, wasn't a mistake anyone makes accidentally. She thought about what Muro had said. The two other patients, the ones who hadn't had someone noticing specific things in the corridor. The anger came back, same as before. Clean and direct. She didn't say anything about it. Muro told me about the others, she said instead. His jaw tightened briefly. Kavanaugh and Reyes. Both WITSEC adjacent. Both were here inside an 8-month window. He said the names like he'd been carrying them. Kavanaugh's family still thinks it was a cardiac event. I know. She didn't know. Not specifically, not the names. Muro hadn't told her the names. But she'd worked in hospitals long enough to know exactly what that looked like from the outside. The hospital's record, the physician's language, the careful architecture of a plausible explanation. When this is fully documented, that's going to change. That's the hope. Her phone buzzed. Not a text. A call from a number she didn't recognize, different from the one that had sent her the text, but in the same 9-digit format that wasn't standard domestic. She answered. Voss? A man's voice she didn't know, not DeMarco. Someone older, with the economy of speech that meant he talked on the phone the way he did everything else, efficiently. Your message reached me 40 minutes ago. I've had my people running the financial tracking since then. She stood up, walked to the far side of the room, and kept her voice low. What did you find? 3 shell entities were dissolved in the last 70 minutes. 2 new structures registered in Delaware and Nevada, respectively. The movement started at 9:03 p.m., 17 minutes after Pratt began his statement. She had already moved to the door. She opened it and looked at the 2 agents. I need to reach Special Agent Muro right now. The first agent, the one who'd been there from the start, had the practiced expression of someone accustomed to not being told everything and not loving it. She's in an active interview. This can't wait for the interview. I can pass a message. I need you to physically interrupt the interview and tell her the financial architecture is moving. She'll understand what that means. She looked at him steadily. If you wait 5 more minutes to decide whether to do that, the window closes. I need you to do it now. He looked at the second agent. She didn't wait for them to finish the calculation. She went back into the room, picked up the folding chair, and set it outside the door. She sat in it, pulled out her phone and opened a notes application and started writing. Everything Teller had told her about the Harrisburg Protocol, the sequence of Pratt's naming, the specific timing of the financial movement, in a format that could be handed to an investigator in 10 seconds if needed. Her hands were not entirely steady. She noticed that without judgment. The second agent disappeared down the corridor. The first one remained, watching her write. After 4 minutes, she heard footsteps, quick, purposeful, the rhythm of someone who'd been moving fast for the last 90 seconds. Muro came around the corner with DeMarco half a step behind her and her tablet in her hand. And even from 15 feet away, Audrey could see that someone had already told her enough. Tell me what you have, Muro said. Audrey stood, handed her the phone with the notes open. Muro read it in 10 seconds. Her face didn't change in any dramatic way. She was too controlled for that. But something around her eyes went tight and then deliberate. The look of someone compressing a very bad feeling into a workable shape. Delaware and Nevada, Muro said. 3 entities dissolved, 2 registered. The registration timestamps on the new entities begin at 9:03. Pratt started talking at 8:46. Audrey kept her voice level. 17 minutes. Enough time to confirm the arrest without waiting for the news cycle. Muro was already looking at DeMarco. It's the Harrisburg pattern, DeMarco said. He'd heard enough to make the connection. We had a memo on it from the Harrisburg field office 8 months ago. I know what the memo said. Muro handed the phone back to Audrey. Who gave you the financial tracking information? The source came through Marshall Teller. Muro glanced at the door. He's been in communication? He passed a number to me. I made the call. I left the message. She said it clearly, without apology. He had information about the distraction protocol, and he needed it relayed through someone outside the building's operational chain because he was concerned about an internal feed. The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds, and they were the most loaded 3 seconds Audrey had been inside since the stairwell. "He thinks we have a leak," Murrow said. "He thinks the pattern is consistent with one. He said he can't prove it." Murrow looked at DeMarco again. A different look this time. The look of two people who had been working together long enough to have a shared language that didn't need words. Something passed between them that Audrey wasn't part of. "All right," Murrow said. "All right." She said the second one differently. Not for Audrey, for herself. Processing, resetting. "I need Pratt's interview suspended. Don't tell him why. Extend the break for bathroom and water. Keep it routine. I need you to pull everyone's entry credentials for tonight from hospital security. Real security, before 5 p.m., and I need that done in the next 10 minutes. DeMarco was already moving. Murrow turned back to Audrey. "The source who gave you the financial tracking, is it reliable?" "Teller trusts him." "That's not nothing." She paused. "It's not everything either." "No." Audrey agreed. "But the timestamps don't lie. The entities moved 17 minutes into Pratt's statement. Whatever else is true or not true, that timing happened." Murrow looked at her for a moment. The look that had cataloged her the first time, but with more information behind it now. "The credentialing file on you," Murrow said carefully. "The 4-year gap. Federal contractor, civilian advisory. With the Veracruz recognition protocol in your muscle memory." Audrey said nothing. "I'm not asking you to confirm anything," Murrow said. "I'm telling you that the gap is about to become relevant to this investigation, and you should probably think about what you want to say when someone official asks you directly." She had thought about it. She'd been thinking about it in pieces for the last 2 hours, the way you thought about the thing you'd spent 4 years putting down. Not gone, just set aside, in the specific way that turned out not to be permanent. She was about to respond when DeMarco appeared at the end of the corridor. He wasn't running, but the way he was walking, the controlled urgency of it, hit her before he even opened his mouth. "Murrow," his voice was tight, "we have a problem." "The credentials?" "No." He stopped in front of them and looked at Audrey once before looking back at his supervisor. "Pratt just asked for his phone call. He's been sitting in there not asking for anything for the last 90 minutes, and right now he asked for his phone call." "He has that right," Murrow said. "We haven't—" He said one sentence before he asked. DeMarco's jaw was set in a way that meant he was choosing his words carefully. He said, "Tell Voss she should have left when she had the chance." The corridor was very quiet. Audrey felt the shape of it settle around her. Not panic, not even fear, but the specific clarity of a situation that had just revealed its final dimension. Pratt knew who she was. He'd known before the conference room, maybe from the moment she'd first appeared in the corridor near 714, and he had sat in that interview room for 90 minutes performing his distraction with her name in his mouth the whole time. Waiting. Her phone buzzed, a call from the 9-digit number again. She answered it. The voice was different this time. Not the efficient older man from before, someone else. And what they said made her hand go very still against the side of her face. The voice on the phone was a woman's, calm in the way that people were calm when they had decided something, and the deciding was the hard part and everything after it was just execution. "Ms. Voss, we don't know each other, but I think you understand by now that this situation is larger than one hospital and one administrator." Audrey turned slightly away from Murrow, not to hide the call. Murrow could see she'd answered, could read the change in her posture, but to give herself 3 inches of acoustic privacy. "Who is this?" she said. "Someone who has been watching this investigation for considerably longer than Special Agent Murrow has been running it, and someone who needs you to understand something before the next 20 minutes happen." A pause, precise and calibrated. Pratt's statement contains a name. He hasn't released it yet. He's holding it as his value, the thing he trades for his arrangement. That name is the reason this network has operated for 6 years without a federal prosecution. Not because the evidence didn't exist, because the evidence kept disappearing. Audrey's eyes moved to Murrow without meaning to. The woman on the phone didn't wait for a response. "I'm not telling you to do anything with this. I'm telling you so that when the name comes out, and it will come out tonight, Pratt will give it up because he has no choice now. You understand why the room will go quiet in a particular way. You're telling me there's someone inside the investigation. I'm telling you that the evidence has disappeared 3 times in 6 years, and that is not a statistical accident. The calm in her voice had a weight to it that wasn't threatening. It was the weight of someone who had been carrying this for a long time and had found, finally, a place to set part of it down. Teller was supposed to be the prosecution's anchor, the witness that didn't disappear. They couldn't touch his testimony, so they came for him medically. I know that. What you don't know is that the treatment protocol they used on him, the medication interactions, those combinations were sourced from someone with clinical knowledge. Not Pratt. Pratt is an administrator. He knows budgets and access and leverage. The clinical design of what they did to Teller and to Kavanaugh before him came from someone with a medical background who understood exactly what those combinations would do and how long it would take. The East Annex corridor was very quiet. 40 feet away, Muro and DeMarco were having a low, rapid conversation, and Audrey could hear the register of it without the words. A physician, she said, or someone with equivalent training. The woman paused. The name Pratt is about to give up is not a network operative. It's a department head at Harlow Valley. She kept her voice level through effort that she felt in her jaw. Who? I don't know. I have the function. Clinical architect. They called the role in the communications we intercepted, but not the identity. Pratt knows. And now you do too. Another pause. I'm sorry to put this on you. There wasn't a better option that didn't involve another hour we don't have. The call ended. She stood with the dead phone against her ear for 1 extra second, then lowered it. Muro was watching her from 10 feet away. The expression on her face was the expression of someone exercising significant restraint. Tell me, Muro said. Audrey told her. She watched Muro's face move through 3 distinct internal states in about 4 seconds. The first was the controlled disbelief of someone hearing something that contradicted their operational model. The second was the recognition of why it fit anyway, and the third was something harder and more specific, the look of someone recalculating who in their immediate environment they could fully trust. It was the third one that was the most honest. A department head, Muro said. That's what she said. Who was she? I don't know. The number format was the same as Teller's contact, federal, not standard domestic. Audrey put the phone in her pocket. She knew about Kavanaugh. She knew the clinical term the network used internally. DeMarco said, if there's a physician involved at the department head level, they had full access to medication protocols, patient records, and the administrative chain of command for clinical decisions. They could have signed off on treatment orders without triggering any review. They could have designed what happened to Teller to look like complication of injury, Audrey said. If he'd died, it would have been ruled consistent with the original wound. She thought about the specific combination Muro had described earlier, the medication interactions. She ran the pharmacology of it in her head, the way she'd been trained to think through drug cascades. Whoever designed that protocol knew how to stay inside the margin of plausible, just close enough to explainable that no one would look twice. You can assess that, Muro said. It wasn't a question. I can make a reasonable clinical judgment. I'm not a physician. But you know enough to look at his treatment record and tell me if something in it was deliberate. Yes, Muro looked at DeMarco. Get me Teller's full medication record from admission. Everything administered, everything ordered, everything flagged as declined or modified. She looked back at Audrey. I need you in the room when I review it. Then I need to tell you something first. Audrey kept her voice even. If the department head is the clinical architect, they've been in this hospital tonight. They may still be in this building. The lockdown kept most staff on site. The quality of silence that followed was different from the ones before it. Walk me through the department heads who were on site tonight, Muro said to DeMarco. I'd need the administrative roster. Get it. She was already moving. Voss, with me. They set up in the East Annex conference room. Teller still on the cot, the 2 agents repositioned outside, Muro and DeMarco at the folding table with a laptop, and Teller's full medication record pulled from the hospital system by an agent who had physical admin access to the server room. Audrey sat across from Muro with the printout in front of her. and went through it the way she went through every document that mattered, systematically, without skipping, without assuming she knew what she was looking for before she found it. It took 11 minutes. The document was 34 pages covering 36 hours of admission, and the answer was on page 19 in the medication administration record for hour 22 of Teller's stay. A combination of a standard anticoagulant at a dose that was within normal range individually and a second agent classified in his chart as prophylactic, routine post-GSW protocol, that at those specific doses would interact with the first to create a bleeding risk that would be internally catastrophic under the right physical stress. The right physical stress being, for example, an extraction under tactical conditions. They had designed it to kill him during his own rescue. She set the page on the table and tapped the 2 entries with her finger. Didn't say anything. Muro leaned over and looked. Then DeMarco. Then Muro picked up the page. The second agent was ordered at hour 18, Audrey said, 4 hours before it was administered. The ordering physician, she checked the notation. Dr. Warren Galt, pulmonology. DeMarco was already typing. He's a department head? Muro asked. Pulmonology is a full department, yes. Was he on site tonight? DeMarco's typing stopped. He badged in at 3 p.m. He's not on the list of personnel who checked out before the lockdown. Muro stood. Where would he be? She said. It was directed at Audrey. She thought about the hospital's layout. The lockdown had pushed most staff toward the ER and the main nursing stations. Administrative personnel had been directed to the second-floor conference rooms. Physicians on call would be in the doctor's lounge or in active patient areas. But a department head who was not on call tonight, who had no clinical reason to be in the building, would not have a comfortable place to shelter in place without people asking why he was there. He'd want to be somewhere he could monitor the situation without being questioned about his presence, she said. Somewhere with access to information. She thought about it. The clinical informatics suite, 3rd floor, main wing. It has real-time access to the hospital system, including security feeds, medication administration records, everything. It's badge access restricted, and it's not a space most people think of during an emergency. Can you get us there? Yes. She was already standing. Mom. The main wing's 3rd floor was more populated than the East Annex. Staff had been directed to shelter in the interior sections, and the hallways had clusters of people in scrubs and white coats sitting against walls or standing near nursing stations, the specific restless energy of people who had been told to wait and were not good at it. Nobody looked at Audrey the way they'd looked at her earlier in the night, when she was the nurse being escorted away by the chief administrator. The night had rearranged the social geography of the building significantly. The clinical informatics suite was at the end of a branch corridor off the main hall, behind a door that required either a physician's badge or an IT administrator's credentials. Muro had both. One of her agents had pulled a master physical key from hospital administration 30 minutes earlier. She used it without ceremony. The suite was a room of 6 workstations with multiple monitors each, running live feeds of the hospital system. Medication records, patient vitals, census data, security camera outputs on 2 of the screens. It was not a glamorous space, more server room than office, with industrial shelving on one wall and the low hum of cooling equipment. It was also not empty. Warren Galt was at the workstation nearest the door, and when the light changed as the door opened, he turned in his chair with the specific quality of a man who had been expecting someone and wasn't sure if this was the right someone. He was 60, heavy-set, with the kind of face that had once been authoritative and now had something collapsed behind the eyes. The look of a man who had made too many calculations and was running out of the energy that calculations required. He looked at Muro, at DeMarco, at Audrey. His eyes stayed on Audrey longer than the others. Dr. Galt, Muro said, I'm Special Agent Renata Muro, Federal Organized Crime Task Force. I need you to step away from the workstation. He didn't move immediately. His right hand was near the keyboard. On the monitor in front of him, Audrey could see, but from 8 feet away, that he had a medication record open. Teller's. He was looking at Teller's record. He's alive, Audrey said. Galt looked at her. Marshall Teller is alive, she said. The combination you designed didn't work. He was extracted before the physical stress could trigger the cascade. Something moved across Galt's face that was complicated and unpleasant and very human. Relief and its opposite existing in the same moment. The specific conflict of a person who had done something and was not entirely sure how they felt about the outcome. She had expected him to look like a villain, and he didn't. He looked like a man who was very tired and very trapped, and had been both for longer than anyone had known. "Step away from the workstation," Muro said again. He pushed the chair back, stood. His hands went up, not dramatically, just raised to shoulder height in the way of someone who had already decided. DeMarco moved in. He had Galt turned and cuffed with the practiced speed of someone who'd done it many times, and Galt let it happen without resistance. His face had gone into a particular blankness, the expression of someone who had made the last decision they were going to make for a long time and was now waiting for whatever came next. "I need to know one thing," Muro said to him. "Before we go any further, before you talk to your attorney, before anything else. The man feeding information out of my investigation. Give me a name." Galt looked at the floor. "Dr. Galt." "I want my attorney," he said. His voice was very quiet. "That's your right." Muro's voice didn't change temperature. "But whatever you give us voluntarily in the next 30 seconds gets noted in a way that whatever you give us later does not. You know what's happening to the network right now. You know what Pratt is doing, you know what your cooperation is worth, and you know that window is not staying open." He looked up. His eyes moved to Audrey again with that specific quality. Not asking for something, just registering her presence. The nurse from the corridor, the person who'd been watching. "There's an analyst at the field office," he said. "Evidence processing, not operations. I don't know how long. I was only told he existed, not who he worked with or how much he accessed." He stopped. "That's everything I have on it." Muro held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she nodded once to DeMarco, and DeMarco moved Galt toward the door. She stood in the middle of the clinical informatics suite after they left and didn't move for a moment. Audrey stayed near the door and let her have it. "An analyst," Muro said. Not to Audrey specifically, just putting it in the air. "Evidence processing is positioned to see everything coming in before it's formally logged," Audrey said. "I know." The flatness of it said she'd already worked through the implications. 6 years, 3 disappearing evidence files. She turned and looked at the monitors, the live feeds, the census data, the orderly flow of hospital information moving through the system in real time. Galt designed the clinical approach and fed results back. The network gave him what? Money. Probably. Protection for something. Probably. She didn't speculate further. That was Muro's job, not hers. Right. Muro picked up her radio, made 2 calls in rapid sequence. The first to someone at the field office whose name she didn't say aloud. The second to DeMarco, who had taken Galt no more than 60 seconds down the corridor. Both calls were brief and specific, and when she was done with them, she had the look of someone who had set a large number of things in motion simultaneously and was now in the window between setting them and seeing them land. She looked at Audrey. "You should know. Pratt gave up Galt's name 15 minutes ago. We were already moving toward him before Galt was in that chair." "I know." "You didn't know that." "I know now." She shrugged slightly. "It doesn't change what happened in that room." Muro studied her with the same cataloging look, but there was something different in it now. Not the assessment of a variable, but the recognition of something more settled. "You've done this before, not nursing." "I've done a lot of things." "The credentialing gap." "You said you weren't going to ask directly." "I said I wasn't going to ask you to confirm anything." The distinction was clear and deliberate. "I'm asking now." Audrey looked at the monitors. The hospital system, running, patients' vitals moving in their small, persistent rhythms. The ER census showing 43 people in the department, which was high for this hour, but explained by the night's events. The building doing what it was built to do, underneath everything that had happened in it. "Communications and signals intelligence," she said, "embedded with federal tactical operations for 6 years. I left under circumstances that I didn't choose, and I came back to something I was good at before I was good at that." She looked at Muro. "I'm a nurse. That's not a lesser thing." "I didn't say it was." "No." She paused. You didn't. Muro's radio crackled. She answered it, listened for 20 seconds, said 3 words, copy, hold position, and ended the transmission. Pratt's attorney arrived, she said. The interview is formally suspended. Whatever he was going to release in that room tonight, that's the end of the voluntary portion. She moved toward the door, which means the next phase runs through the courts and through whatever he's already given us and through Galt. Is it enough? For Pratt and Galt? Yes. She stopped at the door. For the network? The piece we get tonight is the piece we can prosecute. The larger architecture is going to take considerably longer. She said it with the specific exhaustion of someone describing a reality they had made their peace with in a professional sense, while not having made their peace with it in any other sense. By midnight, the 7th floor of Harlow Valley Medical Center had been processed as a crime scene, photographed, cataloged, and partially released back to nursing staff for the patient care that couldn't wait for investigative timelines. The ER had been formally deactivated from emergency lockdown at 11:20 p.m. following clearance from the federal team. 2 of the false security personnel were in federal custody. The third, the one from the 7th floor corridor, had a gunshot wound to the thigh from the tactical entry. Non-lethal, properly treated by the hospital's own trauma team, with the particular irony of that not being lost on anyone. Pratt was formally arrested at 11:47, walked out of the 4th floor administrative corridor in handcuffs past a cluster of hospital staff who had not dispersed despite the late hour and the resolution of the immediate emergency, because people knew something significant was happening and proximity felt important. He did not look at anyone as he was taken out. He kept his eyes on the floor with the focused intentionality of someone managing their public moment. The woman with the portfolio, whose name turned out to be Sandra Wick, a paralegal connected to a law firm that had 3 other clients currently under federal investigation, was arrested simultaneously in the hospital's main lobby where she had apparently been waiting, for reasons she declined to explain, since 10 p.m. Galt was transported separately, ahead of Pratt, without the audience. Audrey watched none of this directly. She was on the 7th floor, at the nursing station, working through the medication flag backlog with Novak and the young nurse whose name she'd learned was Petra, 23, second year on the job, who had held herself together through the entire night with the effortful composure of someone determined not to show how frightened they were. 708's orders are confirmed valid, Petra said, reading from the hard copy chart. Do I override the system flag or wait for pharmacy? Override it and document the override with timestamp and your rationale, Audrey said. Pharmacy won't clear the queue until after 2 a.m. given what's happening, and 708 is due her dose at midnight. Okay, Petra wrote, then stopped. How do you know when to just decide? Audrey looked at her. The question was genuine, not a challenge, not a philosophical inquiry, just a 23-year-old nurse asking something real at midnight after a terrible shift. When the cost of waiting is higher than the cost of being wrong, she said, and when you can defend your reasoning to someone smarter than you the next morning. She paused. You write down your reasoning every time. That's not about covering yourself. It's about making sure you can see your own logic clearly enough to know if it's actually sound. Petra wrote that down too. Novak caught Audrey's eye from across the station and said nothing, just held the look for a moment in a way that communicated something that didn't need a word put on it. She'd been in this hospital for 4 years. She'd worked with Novak across dozens of shifts, mostly in the background, mostly as the nurse who handled the things others missed and didn't make a point of it. Tonight, he was looking at her the same way the agents did, with the recalibrated awareness of someone who had understood a person as one thing and discovered they were several things and was now figuring out where to put that. At 12:30, DeMarco appeared on the 7th floor. He looked the way people looked at the end of a very long operational night, functioning but running on the last of something. Muro wants you downstairs, he said, when you can. Give me 20 minutes. Take what you need. She finished the medication queue with Petra and Novak, made a note in the chart for room 712 about a drainage issue that still needed addressing in the morning. Left the station in shape for the overnight shift that was already 2 hours into what was supposed to be a quiet rotation. She found Muro on the 2nd floor, in the conference room where Pratt had delivered his non-termination termination less than 4 hours ago. The room had been cleared of the portfolio and the people who'd inhabited it with such certainty, and now it held Muro, 2 laptops, a phone system that had been set up since Audrey had last been in the corridor, and a legal pad covered in Muro's handwriting. Teller was there too. He was in a wheelchair that he was visibly unhappy about, but had accepted as the condition of being allowed out of the East Annex. His IV had been capped off. She noted the change, checked his color, decided it was acceptable. He looked better than he had an hour ago. Still thin and worn, but with something more alert behind the eyes, the quality of a person re-engaging after days of managed diminishment. "Sit down," he said when she came in. She sat. "I'm told you found Galt." "Muro found Galt. I knew the building." "That's a distinction you shouldn't undersell." He said it without inflection, which meant he meant it. "The medication record. You found the combination. It wasn't hard to find if you were looking for it." 11 pages of standard post-GSW protocol, Muro said from across the table. Every attending and consulting physician who reviewed that chart prior to tonight missed it. "They weren't looking for it," Audrey said. "They were looking at a trauma patient with a wound that was healing on schedule. The interaction I flagged was within range for each agent individually. The danger was in the combination under specific physical stress conditions." She paused. "You'd have to know that you were looking for intentional design rather than accidental prescription." "And you knew to look for that," Teller said. "I knew something had been done to you medically. Muro told me that. It narrowed the parameters." "The field office analyst," Muro said. "The leak. We identified him at 12:04. She said it without drama. 8 years in evidence processing. His name is Gerald Foss. He's being taken into custody in Billings right now." She looked at the legal pad. 6 years. The 3 disappeared evidence files all passed through his unit. The scale of it settled in the room. 6 years of a network operating with an insurance policy inside the investigation itself. And everything that had flowed from that, all the cases that hadn't been made, and all the people who had been in the wrong hospital room at the wrong time. Kavanaugh and Reyes. She thought about the names Teller had said earlier, carrying them. "I want their families to know the truth," she said. "Kavanaugh and Reyes. When this is prosecuted, when the record is established, I want their families to have the accurate account." Muro met her eyes. "That will be part of the prosecution's documentation. I'll make sure it's not buried." It still wasn't a clean yes, but it was the most honest version of the answer available, and she took it. Teller said, "There's something else." She looked at him. "The hospital board is going to have decisions to make. About Pratt's position, about the clinical and administrative review that has to happen across 14 months of his tenure, about what this institution looks like going forward." He said it carefully, the way people said things when they were building towards something they weren't sure of the reception to. That review is going to need someone who understands both the clinical and the institutional dimensions of what happened here. Someone with a background that... "Marshall Teller," she said. He stopped. "I'm a nurse," she said. That's what I came back to, and that's what I'm doing tomorrow morning." She let it sit. "I appreciate what you're gesturing at, but my patients are upstairs and my job is still there." He looked at her for a moment, then something in his face settled into what might have been, from him, a form of genuine respect. "All right," he said. "That said," she looked at Muro. "The credentialing file, the gap. If the prosecution needs documentation of why I know what I know about the recognition protocol and the operational context, we'll handle it appropriately," Muro said, "with the minimum disclosure necessary." "Good." She stood. Her back ached in a way that had been building since approximately the 3rd floor and was now announcing itself with the full confidence of something that had been patient long enough. She was 41 years old and had spent the last 7 hours moving through a hospital in her regular shoes because she'd been in the middle of changing when everything started. She was at the door when Muro said her name. She turned. Muro was looking at the legal pad. Then she looked up, and the expression on her face was one that Audrey hadn't seen from her before. Not operational, not analytical, just direct, and a little worn around the edges in the way that people's faces were when it was past midnight and the hard things were almost done. "Douglas Pratt," Muro said, "when he was being transported, he asked the agent with him one question." She paused. He asked how we found out about the security positions, how we knew they weren't real staff. Audrey waited. The agent told him it was a nurse on the floor who'd been watching. Okay, she said. He said, Murrow looked back at the legal pad. He said, we should have fired her 3 hours earlier. The silence held for a moment. Then Audrey said, probably. And something in Murrow's face moved, not quite a smile, but the nearest thing to one that the night had produced so far, and Audrey turned and walked out of the room. She was in the elevator going back to 7 when her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize in a format that wasn't the 9-digit federal pattern, just a standard number, Montana area code. She opened it. This is Becca. From 3. I did what you said. Patients are fine. Everyone's fine. I don't know what happened tonight, but thank you. She looked at the text for a moment, then she typed back, you did good. Get some rest. The elevator opened on 7. She stepped out into the corridor. The glass still at the edges, the evidence markers still in place, the familiar antiseptic smell of the floor she'd worked for 4 years, and walked back to the nursing station. Petra looked up. You're back. I'm back. She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. What's next? Petra slid a chart across the counter. 711. The doctor changed the wound care order, and I'm not sure I'm reading his handwriting correctly. Audrey took the chart, read the order. Read it again. You're reading it right. He's using an older notation system. It means twice daily, not twice per shift. She set it back down. Common confusion. Make a note in the chart and flag it for clarification at morning rounds. Okay, Petra wrote. Then, Are you okay? She thought about the question honestly, the way she tried to think about most things honestly. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. She had a cut on her jaw she still hadn't addressed. Somewhere in the last 7 hours, she had made decisions that had mattered in ways she was still fully processing. And there were names she was carrying that she hadn't been carrying at the start of the shift. And she was going to be sitting with all of that for a long time. I'll be okay, she said. How's your patient in 707? Petra straightened slightly. The shift from personal to professional. The reflex of a nurse who understood that the work was always the answer. Stable. His blood pressure was up an hour ago, but it came down after we repositioned. Good. Let's check him. She walked down the corridor, Petra 2 steps behind her, and the work was what it always was. Specific and necessary and not done. But somewhere below her, in a federal transport vehicle moving through the dark streets of Carver's Reach, Douglas Pratt sat in the back seat and thought about a nurse he had dismissed in a corridor. And Warren Galt sat in a separate vehicle and thought about a medication record he had designed to be invisible, and the investigation that had been bleeding evidence for 6 years had a name attached to the leak now, and that name was in a federal database in a way it was never coming out of. And on the 7th floor in room 714, the bed was empty and the monitors were quiet, and the space where Marcus Teller had been, frightened and diminished and surviving on stubbornness, was just a room again. Just a hospital room. It would have a new patient by morning. Her phone buzzed one more time, and when she looked at it, the text was from a number she didn't recognize. Different format, not federal, not local, not anything she could place. 4 words. Watch the morning news. She didn't watch the morning news. She watched it at 6:47 a.m. on Petra's phone in the break room on the 7th floor, standing up with a cup of coffee she'd been carrying for 11 minutes without drinking, while Petra sat at the table and Novak leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, and his face doing the thing faces did when they were seeing something they'd suspected but hadn't been allowed to fully believe until this moment. The feed was a local Carver's Reach station, a reporter standing outside the federal courthouse downtown in the dark because the news had broken before dawn and nobody had waited for daylight. Behind her, the building was lit, and there were vehicles parked at angles that indicated urgency rather than planning. The chyron read, Harlow Valley Medical Center Administrator Arrested. Federal Organized Crime Charges. Second arrest. Department Head, Clinical Fraud Allegations. The reporter was saying something about a 6-year investigation, a federal task force, a network that had used legitimate medical institutions as infrastructure for financial crimes and witness elimination. She was saying it with the careful precision of someone reading from a statement because the full details hadn't been released yet, but the bones of it were there, enough for anyone listening to understand the shape of what had happened inside that building last night. Then the feed cut to an exterior shot of Harlow Valley itself. The building in the early morning dark, a few vehicles still in the lot from the night's operations. The 7th floor windows visible and intact because glass replacement had happened between midnight and 4 a.m. by a crew that had worked in what looked like organized silence from the ground. Petra said quietly, "That's us." Novak said nothing. Audrey set down the coffee cup, finally, and looked at the phone screen for another few seconds. Then she handed it back to Petra and went to check on her patients. The morning was strange in the way that mornings after significant nights always were, the world insisting on its own continuity while the people inside it were still catching up to what had changed. Medications due, vitals to check, a post-surgical patient in 704 who'd had a difficult night and needed repositioning, and a conversation with his family that the overnight nurse had flagged as still pending. Normal work. The work that existed regardless of what had happened in the hallways and the stairwells and the conference rooms. She did it the way she always did it, without shortcuts and without the particular efficiency that looked like speed, but was actually just cutting corners in ways that compounded later. At 8:15, the day shift charge nurse arrived, a woman named Gloria Hendricks who had 23 years in the hospital and who came on shift like weather, organized and total. She stopped at the nursing station, took in the scene, the evidence markers still visible at the far end of the corridor, the 2 federal agents still positioned at the elevator bank, the 7th floor running at about 70% of its normal capacity because 4 rooms remained under investigation hold, and made the face of someone processing a great deal of information very quickly. Then she looked at Audrey. "You're still here," she said. "I am." "You were on last night." "I was." Gloria looked at the corridor, then back. "Are you okay to be here?" It was asked with the specific directness of someone who had been a nurse long enough to know the difference between someone pushing through necessary fatigue and someone who was genuinely at a limit. It was a clinical question as much as a personal one. "I'm okay," Audrey said. "I'll hand off and go." "Sit down first and tell me what I'm walking into." She sat down. Told her. Not everything. Not the parts that belonged to the federal case, but the clinical picture. The medication flags that had been resolved, the chart notes for each patient with outstanding issues, the family conversation that still needed to happen in 704. Gloria listened with a legal pad and wrote things down and asked specific questions and didn't ask about any of the rest of it, which was its own form of professionalism. When they were done, Gloria said, "Go home, Audrey." She went. She lived 15 minutes from the hospital in a second-floor apartment in a building that had been built in the 1970s and hadn't been significantly updated since, which meant the radiators made noise in winter and the windows were drafty, and the hot water took 4 minutes to arrive from the building's ancient heater, but the rent was manageable, and the neighborhood was quiet, and she had made it hers in the way that people made spaces theirs, not through decoration, but through use, through the accumulation of ordinary evenings and ordinary mornings until the walls knew who she was. She showered for a long time. The cut on her jaw was superficial. She cleaned it, put a small adhesive strip on it, and looked at herself in the mirror with the objective regard of someone taking inventory. She looked tired. She looked like a person who had been through something. She also looked, in some way she couldn't entirely articulate, like herself. She slept for 4 hours. Not the sleep of someone who'd resolved something and could rest completely, the fractured surface sleep of a body that was exhausted but still running, still processing. She dreamed in fragments that didn't cohere into narrative, woke at 1 p.m. with the full weight of the day landing on her before she was entirely conscious. She lay there for a few minutes without moving. She thought about Kavanaugh and Reyes. She had their names now, both of them, from what Murrow had told her, and she thought about their families, who had been given a specific version of events that was carefully, deliberately wrong, and who were going to receive a different version in the coming weeks as the federal prosecution built its case and the documentation became part of the record. There was no good way for that to happen. There was only the true way, which was always more complicated than the false version and arrived later and didn't come with an easy container to put it in. She hoped Muro kept her word about that. She thought she probably would. The call from the hospital board came at 3:30 p.m. She almost didn't answer it. The number was the main hospital line, and she was standing in her kitchen eating leftovers she'd reheated without tasting them, and she genuinely considered letting it go to voicemail. She answered it on the fourth ring. Ms. Voss, this is Harriet Cho, chair of the Harlow Valley Board of Directors. The voice was measured and precise, with the particular register of someone accustomed to running meetings where a great deal of money and consequence moved through the room. I'd like to ask if you're available to come in tomorrow morning. There are several matters we'd like to discuss with you. Audrey set down her fork. What kind of matters? Your employment status, for one. Your role going forward, for another. A pause. I want to be direct with you. The board has been briefed on last night's events in significant detail, including your specific role. We have a great deal to discuss. I'll be there, Audrey said. 9 o'clock. She went back to her leftovers. The boardroom was on the fourth floor, 3 doors down from where Pratt had kept his office for 11 years. That office was now behind yellow tape with a federal evidence seal on the door, and walking past it on the way to the boardroom had a texture that Audrey noticed and didn't comment on. Harriet Cho was 62, small, with the posture of someone who had stopped apologizing for occupying space about 20 years ago. She sat at the head of the table, and there were 6 other board members present, and they all looked at Audrey when she came in with the specific attention of people who had done significant reading on the subject they were about to discuss. She sat where they indicated, across from Cho, with a glass of water she didn't touch. Cho said, "We'll skip the preamble because I don't think you need it. We've reviewed the federal briefing, the incident report, and we've spoken directly with Special Agent Muro this morning." She folded her hands. Douglas Pratt terminated your employment the night before last in a way that was not only procedurally improper, but was done in service of concealing a federal crime. That termination is voided, effective the moment it was made. All right, Audrey said. Your position is fully reinstated with back pay for any shifts missed and without any notation in your employment file. All right? Cho looked at her steadily. You're not surprised. I figured the termination would be addressed. What did you figure we'd do beyond that? Audrey looked at her. It was a genuine question, not a negotiating position or a test of deference, just a woman who wanted to know what the person across from her actually thought. I figured you'd want to do something, she said. A title, a new role, something that communicates to everyone watching that the board recognizes what happened and is responding to it appropriately. She paused. I figured there'd be a conversation about what I actually want. Something shifted in Cho's expression. Not surprise exactly, but the recalibration of a person who had expected to be in front of a more predictable situation than the one currently across the table. What do you want? Cho said. She'd thought about this. In the 4 hours of broken sleep and the 15-minute drive to the hospital this morning and the 90 seconds waiting for the elevator. I want a formal clinical review of every patient admission routed to this hospital in the last 14 months that involved law enforcement personnel or federal witnesses. I want that review conducted by an independent team, and I want the results documented in a way that can be used in the prosecution. She said it without checking notes because she'd memorized it. I want a full audit of the medication administration protocols for any patient under Dr. Galt's direct clinical authority during his tenure, with specific attention to drug combination orders and deviation from standard care pathways. She could see a board member at the far end of the table writing. Those are institutional reforms, Cho said. Those are necessary actions, she said. Whether you want to call them reforms is your decision. And for yourself. My job back, she said, at the grade I was hired at, not a new title. I'm a nurse. That's what I want to keep being. Cho looked at her for a moment with an expression that was hard to read and genuine. The federal briefing indicated that your background is considerably more extensive than your employment file reflects. My employment file reflects my nursing credentials and 4 years of service at this hospital, Audrey said. That's accurate. They also indicated that without your intervention, Marshall Teller would not have survived the night. I called a number that I'd been given 4 years ago, and I told them what I was seeing. The intervention was theirs. Ms. Voss, Cho said it with a quiet emphasis that meant she was not interested in the deflection. We're going to do the clinical review. We're going to do the medication audit. We're going to bring in the independent team. These things are going to happen because they need to happen and because you're right that they do. She let that settle. And we're going to restore your position and your record and make sure that the way Douglas Pratt treated you is documented as part of the account of what happened in this institution. Good. And we're going to ask you to consider one additional thing. Cho opened the folder in front of her. We're creating an oversight position. Newly created, doesn't exist yet. Clinical Integrity Officer. It reports directly to the board and has authority over clinical standards review, patient safety protocols, and coordination with any future law enforcement activity involving this institution. She slid a single page across the table. It is not a bureaucratic role. It requires someone who understands this hospital from the inside and who has the background to identify problems before they compound. Audrey looked at the page without picking it up. You'd keep your nursing license active, Cho said. This isn't an either-or. She looked at the page. She thought about Teller saying something similar and her telling him she was a nurse and that was what she was going back to. She still meant that. She wasn't changing what she'd said, but she also thought about the overnight shift and Petra asking, how do you know when to just decide? And her answer being when the cost of waiting is higher than the cost of being wrong. She thought about Kavanaugh and Reyes and what it meant that 14 months of the same administration had run through this building without a mechanism to catch it. She thought about what Gloria Hendricks' face had looked like when she arrived on 7 this morning and had to take stock of what her institution had been. She thought about the patient in room 714, tracking the room with eyes that understood what was wrong before anyone else was willing to see it. She picked up the page, read it, set it back down. I have conditions, she said. Cho almost smiled. I thought you might. The role doesn't replace my floor time. I work a minimum of 2 shifts per week as a floor nurse, non-negotiable. Workable. The independent review team for the clinical audit is selected with my input. Not my sole decision, your input and mine. Agreed. And when the prosecution documentation is finalized, Kavanaugh and Reyes, the board formally acknowledges the institutional failure that contributed to their deaths in writing, in the public record, not in a press release, in the actual legal and institutional record. The boardroom was quiet. Cho looked at the page herself for a moment, then at Audrey. That's going to be uncomfortable for this institution. Yes, she said. It should be. Another silence. Then Cho said, Agreed. The formal press conference was 12 days later. It was not at the hospital. It was at the federal courthouse in Carver's Reach, and it was run by the U.S. Attorney's Office with Muro standing to one side and DeMarco 2 steps behind her. The indictments were unsealed that morning. Douglas Pratt on 17 counts, including racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. Warren Galt on 11 counts, including criminal conspiracy, fraudulent medical practice, and 2 counts of murder in the second degree. Gerald Foss, the evidence analyst, on 9 counts related to obstruction and criminal conspiracy. Sandra Wick on 4 counts as an accessory. And 8 other members of the network at varying levels, all named, all charged, the full architecture of 6 years of operation finally visible in the public record. The press was there in numbers that Carver's Reach didn't usually see. National outlets, because the story had the elements that traveled. Corruption inside a hospital, a federal cover-up, a witness who'd nearly been killed in his recovery bed. The local stations had been running it since the night of the arrest, and the national coverage had picked it up by the second day. Audrey stood at the back of the room. She was there because Muro had asked her to be and because she'd said yes without overthinking it. She was in her work clothes because she'd come from a morning shift and hadn't gone home first, and there was probably something on her sleeve from a wound dressing she'd changed at 7 a.m. She was not on the stage. She had specifically asked not to be on the stage. The U.S. Attorney made a statement. Muro made a statement. A representative from the Marshal's Service made a statement about Marshal Teller, who was still in a secure location during his recovery and was not present. Each statement was specific and formal and built the picture methodically, the way prosecutions did. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the facts assembled in sequence until the full shape of the thing was impossible to misread. When the statements were done, a reporter in the second row asked about the individual credited in the federal briefing with first identifying the security compromise, the hospital employee who had initiated contact with the tactical team. The U.S. attorney said that individual had requested not to be publicly identified at this time, and that request was being honored. Audrey stood at the back of the room and listened to that and felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled for 12 days. She wasn't invisible. That was different from before. She understood the difference now. Before, she'd been invisible because people had looked at her and decided she didn't warrant attention. Now she was private, which was a choice, which was entirely different. She left before the questions portion. Muro found her in the courthouse parking lot. She had the look of someone who had just finished something very large and was in the first few minutes of not knowing what to do with her hands. She came across the lot with her jacket open and her badge hanging crooked, and she stopped a few feet away from Audrey and said, "You didn't have to leave early." "I had what I came for." Muro looked at her. "Teller sends his regards. He's in Atlanta, which I probably shouldn't tell you, but he was specific that I tell you he's doing better." "Good." He also said, she stopped, seemed to be deciding something. "He said to tell you that Webb and Park were told about last week, about your role in this. He thought you'd want to know that they know." Audrey thought about that, about Marcus Webb, who had been the operational lead on the team that had built the recognition protocol, and Linda Park, who had designed the primary tree. Two people she had not been in contact with for 4 years, who had gone back to their own versions of moving on, and who now knew that the protocol they'd built together had done exactly what they'd designed it to do in the worst possible moment. It mattered. She hadn't expected it to matter as much as it did. "Tell him thank you," she said. Muro nodded. Then, "The clinical integrity officer role, Cho mentioned it. It's not public yet." "She mentioned it in our briefing." Muro's voice was neutral. "You took it." "I took it with conditions." "I know what the conditions were." She paused. "They were the right conditions." Audrey looked at the courthouse. "There are going to be other hospitals. The network had infrastructure across 6 states. Pratt isn't the only administrator who made those choices, and Galt isn't the only physician. Some of those arrangements are probably still running. We know. Well, if there's a point of contact for what you find, if there's clinical analysis needed in advance of an operation, I know where to find you," Muro said. They looked at each other. 2 women in a parking lot in Montana in the middle of a November that had started to show its edges, the air cold enough to see breath, the courthouse behind them, and the ordinary city around them. "You should have been impossible to find," Muro said. It wasn't a criticism. It was an honest assessment. The credentialing gap, the transfer from Bozeman, the quiet record. You built that specifically. "I needed something normal," Audrey said. "For a while. And now?" She thought about the answer. She thought about Petra asking, "How do you know when to just decide?" She thought about the patient in 704 whose family had needed an honest conversation about realistic outcomes rather than comfortable language, and how she'd had that conversation at 7:30 in the morning after no sleep, and it had still been the right conversation to have, imperfect and necessary. She thought about Novak's face. She thought about Becca's text. She thought about room 714, empty now, with a new patient in it by the next morning. A man who'd had a hip replacement in the afternoon and needed his vitals checked at 2 a.m. and his pain medication assessed, and his family reassured, none of which had anything to do with federal operations or criminal networks, all of which mattered exactly as much as anything else she'd done that week. She thought about the things she'd told the board, that she was a nurse, that was what she was going back to. And she understood that it was still true, and that it was also not the complete truth anymore, and that both things could be real simultaneously without either one being a lie. "I needed something normal," she said again. "I still need that, just—" She paused. "Not only that." Muro looked at her for a moment. Then she extended her hand. Audrey shook it. It was not a ceremonial moment. It was just 2 people in a parking lot confirming an understanding, but it was real, which was worth more than ceremony. She was back on the floor by 2 p.m. The seventh floor nursing station had a new supply cart. The old one had been damaged during the tactical entry and replaced with something slightly larger that actually fit the corner better, which was a small improvement that nobody had planned for. The evidence markers were gone. The windows were intact. Room 714 had a post-surgical patient in it who had no knowledge of what the room had held 10 days before and no reason to know. Margaret Solis found her at the station at 2:30. She stood there for a moment before speaking, which wasn't like her. Solis moved through transactions without pausing at them as a rule. "Your schedule's been updated," Solis said finally, "adjusted for the new role." She said it in the tone of someone who had read the documentation and processed it and arrived at a position of professional acknowledgement without any of the preceding emotional steps being visible. "You'll still be on my floor for the shift assignments." "Yes," Audrey said. Solis looked at the chart in Audrey's hands, then at Audrey. Something moved across her face that didn't resolve into an expression. It was more like the shadow of one, the evidence of something felt that she was choosing not to formalize. "On the elevator," Solis said. "That night. I told you to stay out of it." "You did." "I was wrong." She said it the way she said everything, without decoration, with the directness that was her actual register. "I don't know what I would have done differently if I'd seen what you saw, but I should have asked more questions a long time ago." She paused. "I had concerns about Pratt for months. I chose to stay in my lane." It was not a confession exactly. It was a statement of record from a woman making an honest accounting. "So did a lot of people," Audrey said. Not to excuse it, to contextualize it. "He was good at what he did. That's the reason it worked as long as it did." Solis nodded once. Then she picked up a chart from the rack and got back to work, because that was who she was, and some things didn't change. Audrey watched her go and thought, that was the right ending to that conversation. Not forgiveness, not absolution, not some cathartic reckoning, just two people acknowledging a truth and going back to work. The world was made of those moments far more than it was made of the other kind, and it was worth knowing the difference. She was at the end of her shift when Petra stopped her at the station. "There's a thing I've been trying to figure out how to say," Petra said, "for the last week." Audrey looked at her. 23, still figuring out what kind of nurse she was going to be, the question visible in the way she approached each shift. Too cautious some moments, overconfident in others, calibrating constantly. "Say it," Audrey said. "I didn't do anything that night. I moved the patients on 3 away from the windows like you told me. But I didn't know what was happening and I was scared and I mostly just sat at the station trying not to cry." She looked at the counter. "And you were—" She stopped. "You knew what to do. You knew all of it, and I kept thinking, what would I have done? And I don't think I would have done any of it." Audrey looked at her for a moment. "You would have done what you knew how to do," she said. "And then you would have learned more. And the next time you'd know more than you did this time." She paused. "That's not inspiration. That's just how it works. Nobody walks into the hard thing already knowing the whole of it. But you did. I walked in knowing the parts of it I'd learned a long time ago in a different context. I didn't know this hospital. I didn't know which supply corridors connected where. I didn't know which nurses would hold when it mattered. I figured that out the same way you figure anything out, by paying attention while it's happening." Petra looked at her. "The thing you did," Audrey said, "moving those patients, writing down the medication rationale, holding the station so the overnight team had something to work from when they arrived. Those aren't small things. They're just not visible things, and you should know the difference between invisible and unimportant because they are not the same." Something in Petra's face shifted, not resolved exactly, but pointed in a better direction. She nodded, picked up a chart, got back to work. Audrey pulled on her coat, gathered her bag, walked to the elevator and pressed the button and waited with the particular patience of someone who had stopped filling waiting with noise. She thought about what she'd said to Petra. Invisible and unimportant are not the same. She had believed that for a long time, through 12 years of hospital corridors and 6 years before that of work that had no visible record and 4 years of the specific discipline of becoming ordinary again. She had believed it on every shift when she caught the error or adjusted the drip or had the conversation nobody else wanted to have, and nobody mentioned it and the work just continued. She had believed it in the elevator going down with an administrator who thought her removal was a solution, and in the stairwell with her phone in her hand, and in the service corridor where she raised two fingers against a wire glass window, and everything turned on whether a man she'd never spoken to would know what it meant. He had known, because some things didn't require introduction or credential or the permission of people who'd decided in advance you didn't matter. Some things were just real, and they moved in the world the way real things did, regardless of who acknowledged them. The elevator opened. She stepped in. She was tired in a way that a single night of sleep was not going to fix. The tiredness of someone who had spent significant reserves in a compressed period and would need time to rebuild. She was going to go home and make something to eat and sit somewhere without her phone for an hour and probably feel, at some point, the full weight of everything that had happened now that the institutional machinery had caught up to the events and there was space to feel it. She was also going back on shift in 21 hours. Both things were true. Both things were hers. The elevator reached the ground floor and opened, and she walked through the lobby past the reception desk, where a volunteer she didn't know was directing a family toward the right corridor, and past the front desk where someone was on hold, and out through the main doors into the November cold that hit immediately and completely, the way Montana cold did, not asking permission. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the parking lot, the city beyond it, the ordinary afternoon moving through its business with no awareness of what the building behind her had been through, which was how it should be. The world didn't pause for individual reckoning, and she had never expected it to. A woman walked past her toward the entrance, not looking at her. A visitor, worried about someone inside, focused entirely on the door she was about to go through. Audrey moved out of her path without thinking about it. Made room, the way you did. She walked to her car. She thought about Muro's question in the parking lot. And now? And the answer she'd given, which was true but incomplete, the way most honest answers were. The complete version was harder to say out loud without it sounding like something it wasn't. The complete version was, she had spent 4 years becoming invisible because invisibility had felt like safety, and it had been safety, and she didn't regret it. But somewhere in the last 10 days she had remembered something she'd known before the 4 years, and the transfer and the quiet apartment with the noisy radiator. She had remembered that invisibility and safety were not the same thing either, any more than invisible and unimportant were. That what she was, all of what she was, the nurse and the other thing, the careful and the capable, the person who adjusted a drip rate by looking at someone's face, and the person who knew a recognition signal from a decade ago in a different country, in a different life, that was not a problem to be managed. It was not an excess to be hidden so that other people were more comfortable making their assumptions. It was just her. She had spent a long time letting rooms underestimate her because it was easier than the alternative. She understood the appeal of that. She was not going to make herself smaller to accommodate it anymore. She started the car, sat for a moment with the heat coming up from the vents. Somewhere across the city, a federal case was being built that would take 18 months to prosecute and would result in convictions that stood. Somewhere in Atlanta, Marcus Teller was in a safe house doing physical therapy on a shoulder that was going to give him trouble in cold weather for the rest of his life. Somewhere, Kavanaugh's family and Reyes's family were in the early days of being told the truth, which was the hardest kind of days there were, and also necessary. Somewhere, Douglas Pratt was in a cell running through the sequence of his choices, trying to find the moment where he could have gone differently, and she didn't spend any time on that. Some people made themselves into instruments of harm, and the only relevant question was when the accounting caught up to them, not why they'd started. The accounting had caught up. She put the car in gear, drove home through the ordinary streets of Carver's Reach in the November afternoon, past the coffee shop where she sometimes stopped before shifts, and the library where she returned books she'd borrowed, and the intersection where the light took forever, and everyone in the city seemed to have agreed to accept this without complaint. Her life. The specific texture of it. She had fought for a long time to make it ordinary, and she wasn't giving that up. But she had also stopped pretending that ordinary was the whole of what she was. A woman could be both. A woman could be quiet and formidable. A woman could spend 12 years doing work that nobody noticed and still be the person the room turned on when it mattered. That was not a revelation. It was just a fact she'd stopped arguing with. She pulled into her building's lot, turned off the engine, sat for exactly 1 minute in the silence. Then she went upstairs, made dinner, and left her phone in the kitchen while she ate.